Hi, I'm Honey Silvas, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how I fix my dried out gouache palette and how I'm keeping it juicy and moist. If you're not familiar with gouache, it's a painting medium that's very similar to watercolor. It's water-based like watercolor, so you can reconstitute it with water even when it's dry. However, unlike watercolor, gouache is opaque and you can layer lighter colors on top of darker colors. Normally, you would use gouache straight out of the tube while it's moist so you can get that opacity. But for me personally, I prefer working from a pan rather than working from tubes so that everything's already set up and ready to go, and there's no waste at the end of the painting session. Here's my previous palette where I squeezed the tubes into the pans and let them dry so it was portable and I can travel with them if I wanted to. What I didn't realize was, because they were dried out, it was harder to reconstitute it, back to that creamy consistency so that I can get it opaque, which is the main point of using gouache in the first place. Let me preface this by saying I'm not a gouache artist. I primarily work in watercolors and use gouache mainly as a finishing touch on top of watercolors. So typically, I use only one color at a time. So I wanted a palette where I can just grab the one color if I wanted to, and I didn't need to have the full palette out using a precious table space. Here are the materials I used. I'm using the Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache set of 10, plus a few additional colors. I've had this set for a while, but I haven't been using it all that much because of how hard it was to use my old palette setup. I'm hoping by switching to this new palette that it will be easier to use. I'm using this Dari's jar organizer that comes with 24 clear jars. This is just water from the tap. You can use distilled water that's been boiled, but I didn't want to bother with that, so I just used water straight out of the tap. To stir the paint, I used a scraper and a weeding tool, but you can use a palette knife or a toothpick. I added a few drops of clove oil to each jar to prevent mold. I added a few drops of glycerin to keep it moist. If you don't have glycerin, you can use honey. I prepared a piece of paper that's been cut to the size of the palette that I can use to swatch out the colors. I'm using cold press 100% cotton paper. And I'm using a brush for swatching the colors. I started by labeling the jars at the bottom. I used my Dymo label maker and clear labels, so it's a bit more presentable than writing it on with a waterproof pen, which is what I did previously. I like that these are clear jars so I can see the colors of the paint from the top. I then scoop the paint from the old container to the new. I try to mash it as best as I could while it's dry to get it to powder form. Then I added water and let it soak a bit. I try not to add too much water so that it gets that creamy consistency similar to straight out of the tube. I'm going for a yogurt-like consistency. If you do accidentally add more water than you need, it's okay because you can let the water evaporate and it will naturally dry out over time. I then added 1 or 2 drops of clove oil in each jar to prevent mold. It smells good, but it does smell strong, so use this sparingly. I also added a drop or two of glycerin to keep it moist. Glycerin, like honey, is a humectant, which helps reduce the loss of moisture in the paint. Now to swatch it. I prepared this piece of paper that is cut to the size of the palette. I drew some pencil lines with a ruler and drew a black line with a waterproof pen so I can see the opacity of the paint. Here's the old swatch from the old palette. As you can see, it wasn't very opaque at all because I had a hard time getting it to be opaque from its dry state. Here's my new color swatches and it seems to be more opaque. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out and hopefully I will be able to use this palette more often since it's easier to use. All the materials are linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe.